making okay, looks like I was able to get that fixed.
So, if you can't tell, this is Road to 56. It is an overhaul mod for Hearts of Iron that adds a bunch of new content for various nations. For example, in the vanilla game, the following countries would not have content. The Nordics, quite a few actually. There's also quite a few that are not present at all. Like, for example, the Belgian Congo is its own individual country. But one thing that Hearts of Iron 4 has, for the most part, not touched is Central and South America. There are some mods that add content, but for the most part, unless unless Portugal decides to go monarchist and you're playing as Brazil, you're not going to really see anything happening. And even then, it's just a matter of time. I'm going to start a game really quick because Honduras just because I want to see what the achievements are. Then I'll quit and then I'll start the actual. Then I'll restart and start the actual one. I would normally play on Recruit just for this challenge, but since I need Iron Man on to enable the achievements. Yeah, I know I said I'd do some reactions in the... So I do plan on doing some reactions since I'm aware not everyone enjoys Hearts of Iron strategy games. But I'm going to aim to get things set up first. And in case you're curious why I'm doing that, long story short, you may remember how I tried to do a game of called Paranoia a while back. Because it could be done in like 2 hours, I had like 3 videos I planned on reacting to as well. Oh, but because Paranoia pretty much decided it did not want to work, I didn't end up getting to them. So we're playing on Recruit this time. Now, Honduras is actually a country I have a tiny bit of history with. Not like in this game, to be precise. Not in ice. I was playing a multiplayer game with aim as Mexico. I put a certain leader in power, and basically, if you go down any path that is not the historical path from Mexico, you can unify the rest of the Americas. Central America, but as well as reclaim Aztlan. I was doing that. I wasn't going to fight the United States because they were player controlled, and also, like, by the time I had gotten there, they had already removed most of their debuffs. But when I got to Honduras, for whatever reason, the British player decided to let them in, and as a result, I unintentionally dragged the Comintern. I was communist as Mexico into war with the Allies, which turned what had previously been a standard Allies versus Axis conflict into a 3-way war. I did chew out the British player, and to the credit of the Allies, none of the players or controlled nations joined in. But they did call in Yugoslavia, but the Honduran AI called in Yugoslavia, rather. And as a result, I couldn't just, like, capitulate them and have the war end. I'm turning off Iron Man mode because, first of all, this is a mod and you don't really use that. And also, I'm not sure... Oh, right. This must be the mod that's preventing me from seeing the achievements. If you don't know, in Hearts of Iron 4, you can form certain nations if you get all states under control. It's mainly ones with historical equivalents. And I installed a mod that lets you that tells you what states you need, and I realized that that must be the one that I have enabled that's not allowing me to see the achievements. Kind of wish Paradox would add that in. So Honduras has a very bulky focus tree, both in comparison to the base game where it only has the vanilla. Normally I go monarchist because it's really powerful. I don't think I'll ever go democratic unless they give an alternate path, which is more aggressive. I wouldn't be opposed to going communist, but that's not the point of this stream. So what we are going to do is voluntarily demonetize ourselves. That's what I call going fascist, because it just sounds funnier. We will examine the political climate first. I'm going to build a railroad connecting the two supply ports simply because I don't start with one. I only start off with one unit. Those are the three staple techs. I'll put you in charge of my army for now. I'm not sure which of these two paths I'll take, since if I go with this one, I'll pretty much be locked to the Banana Empire, but on the other hand, I can go ANCAP. If I go with the Alliance of True Corporate States, and I can always just dismantle, and I can just join the Axis without the event. Well, since the only things I have left that I can really do who are starting trade, I'm gonna wait to see if any of you. I think I figured out what that heart in my chat is, by the way. If I'm not mistaken, you can actually use emojis. I'm going to train 2 more units. And deploy them. I do not have a navy or an air force. And I also have a deficit of guns. There is one other reason I'm not immediately starting the reaction. Namely, I'm not sure where I want to put the window with the video that I'll be reacting to. I'm actually going to go for the Honduran economy next, simply because, well, twofold. First of all I want to build up my industry, but second, doing so will allow me to get the focus, which gives me another military factory. And that is something I really need right now. Going with the silent workhorse. Do kind of wish... Don't remember that when I did my test game. Still, more manpower is always a good thing. Okay, once I finish this, I'll get the video up and do the reaction. So. Oh, just a sec. You know, I've always found it odd that historically they chose to go with limiting the navy size as opposed to limiting. Let's see how Italy is doing in Ethiopia. Oh, the Ethiopians are actually holding on. If you don't know the history of United Fruit, it's a very interesting one. It's still around. It's known as Chiquita, actually. So yes, the Chiquita banana lady will be subjugating in our neighbors. We will consider a full United Fruit takeover. Now, unlike like the other ones, we can actually, it wouldn't theoretically be possible to get everything in this focus tree without going to war once. Ideally, what happens is El Salvador is, let's see here, El Salvador or Panama and Guatemala, except Guatemala and Panama because, well, why not? And El Salvador because they're very annoying to fight. Right? Like, they train a ton of small divisions, which also slows down gameplay later on if, like, I don't take them out immediately. Like, I honestly wish Paradox would rework the Monroe Doctrine or something. And so that, like, unless you... like, the countries who are under its effect didn't like, produce units. I'm recruiting that guy simply because, well, if I do this now, I'll probably have enough of army experience of Spanish Civil War. There is one other reason why I'm not immediately bringing up the reaction. It's because I'm honestly not sure where I want to put the video. Kind of feel like it should be somewhere up top, but that's kind of important. And in the middle would be very distracting, so I'm thinking bottom right. Feels odd seeing that happen in this late. Normally it happens like by the end of March 1st, 11th. I mean, Ethiopia is still holding on. Let's hire this guy to help us voluntarily demonetize ourselves faster. It may seem redundant to hire that guy because as we already have a spirit that that increases our demonetization rate, but the reason I'm doing it is because, well, when we do flip, if the ideologies will be affected as well, and, well, that's an odd ideology. And, well, the thing is, our ideology popularity determines stability, and, well, I'd rather have higher stability than lower ones, since we can get strikes and mutinies if we have low stability while we're at war. That's also true of war support. I think with my next batch of political power, I'll go up to limited conscription. Huh. Ethiopia capitulated late. Give me a second. Let's see here. It roughly lasted until May 5th, so Ethiopia actually held on for longer than they did IRL. The other reason... In the base game, AIM, you can actually, like, send... AIM, there's some... AIM, the major countries all have the ability of hiding the focus branches you do not choose. Kinda wish that that they'd implement that for this mod. What do I want to do for my next tech? Come to think of it, artillery is a better use. And this small... and all... This is how you basically ensure that you don't. If you're curious why I did that, long story short, it basically means I'll still have a buffer of out of date guns while productivity for this builds up. Just getting up that playlist. I normally wouldn't do... Yeah, there's the anarchists. Trying to remember which states the nationalists need control over to stop the Carlists from spawning. Okay, yeah, the Carlists are not spawning in this game. If you don't know who they are, they were basically the monarchist faction. Let me just add a filter. Okay, so first a bit of context. This one isn't related. Is the kind of the odd one out for this stream. Basically, if you probably have heard the name John Heisman, and even if you're not a football fan, and while I'm not one myself, it's kind of his legacy is worth reading into. Like, the majority of the modern game.
It's now been 100 years since the worst beatdown between grown adults in the history of American sports. There is so much to tell. There's the dog that chased one of the players around the stadium. There's the kicker who caught his own kick for a touchdown. There's the player who entered the game, took a snap, threw the ball in the air in a state of sheer terror, ran off the field and hid. And of course, there's the score. In 1916, Georgia Tech's football team beat Cumberland College by a score of 202. Oh, sorry. I forgot one.
I think I'll actually use cavalry for this game.
$222 points in a game. That is an unbreakable record. It has been 67 years since a team scored even half that many. To do this, Georgia Tech had to score 32 touchdowns in 55 minutes, which means it had to score a touchdown every minute 43. Now, it is fair to say that Georgia Tech was a million times better than Cumberland College, but that doesn't explain this. Vast superiority alone explains Secretariat, who won the Belmont by 31 lengths. It explains the 1940 Chicago Bears, who won the NFL championship 73-0. It explains the time UConn women's basketball took a 74-9 lead on SMU. Those are routes, yeah, they're blowouts. This was an irrational, malicious act of cruelty that just happened to also technically barely be a sporting event. We have accounts of what happened. It's scoreable. We can score it. In the same way we can award a blue ribbon to a supernova. But first, let's understand where this malice came from. It's 1915. Cumberland's team, which used to be good, is now terrible. The coach is a reverend from around town who doesn't know the rules and doesn't approve of all the violence, so he makes up new practice drills that are more to his liking. In one drill, he has two guys stand a few feet apart and just lob the ball to each other.
You know, I've never really understood. Oh, if I was put in that situation, what I would probably do is just like go around to like a high school or something and ask, hey, what do you do to practice? Like, I'd maybe perhaps just buy the coach lunch or something. You know what I'm saying? I'm good on guns, so that's why I stopped buying steel. Because I do need that factory. I think after I do import American weapons, I'll go back and start and do this one for some actual civilian factories. Only these were all 35-day ones.
Over and over and over. In another drill, he has them sit in a circle and close their eyes, and he would place the ball behind one of them, and then they'd have to guess which one had the ball. It was like an
what purpose would that serve?
even worse version of Duck Duck Goose. I don't know, I feel stupid even talking about it. Unsurprisingly, none of the players came back after that season, and it was up to George Allen, the 20-year-old athletic manager, to save Cumberland football. He figured that if the baseball team could get a little bit of buzz, it could sell enough tickets to finance the football team. So he arranged for Cumberland baseball to beat their opening opponent as badly as they could. The thing is, Cumberland players weren't good enough to do that, so he convinced the minor league baseball team to dress up in Cumberland's uniforms and play as them. It was an entire team full of ringers. I couldn't confirm this, but I believe the minor league team in question was the Nashville Volunteers, half of whom had Major League Baseball experience. Cumberland destroyed Georgia Tech, 22-0. They were hitting everything. After a while, they got bored and they just started bunting every at-bat, and they still scored.
Volunteers is an odd name. Almost forgot to subscribe to this channel. This is by John Boyd. I think he's a sports writer, which is a bit funny when you see what happens later.
Georgia Tech baseball was humiliated, and so was their coach. His name was John Heisman.
See why I said John Heisman and was important?
Heisman was a great baseball coach, but he remains one of football's architects. Let's look at a modern-day football game.
What do I think of the game
shows the
now?
down, yardage, and game clock. That was John Heisman's idea. The quarterback yells, "Hut." Heisman came up with that. Then the center snaps the ball in the air to the quarterback. Heisman invented that. Then the quarterback throws a forward pass. Heisman invented that too. This quarterback was the best in the nation, so they gave him a trophy called the Heisman Trophy. In showing up John Heisman, Cumberland angered a football god. 1916 rolled around, and Cumberland no longer had a football team. Heisman didn't care. Georgia Tech Cumberland was on the football schedule, and Heisman threatened to charge the school $3,000 if they forfeited. That's $66,000 in today's money, and it was more than Cumberland could comfortably afford. Heisman had another target: sports writers. Couldn't stand him. You know what I mean? It's not for no reason. Sports writers are useless. Like, we are useless. Heisman took issue with the way sports writers oversimplified. They figured that the more points a team scored, the better that team was. Heisman knew it wasn't as simple as that, so he wanted to rack up as many points on Cumberland as he possibly could to show that if you really wanted to and your opponent was bad enough, you could score as much as you wanted. In order to save themselves a crippling amount of debt, Cumberland rounded up a bunch of law students, some of whom didn't even know how to play football, and sent them to play against what may have been the best football team on the planet. It's the afternoon of October 7th, 1916. H.J. Carney waits for the opening kickoff to fall out of the sky. He doesn't move. He looks to
Both
his
the
right,
Hindenburg
where Edwards,
incident
the
and
quarterback, meets
Amelia Earhart
He turns to his left,
surviving
where a
as
man
opposed to
listed
the
as George
Hindenburg
Murphy is
disaster.
ready to throw another block. This is not
and,
actually George
and
Murphy.
Amelia
This
Earhart
is Johnny
disappearing.
Dog Nelson, the only ringer George Allen was able to recruit this time around. He's a former player and a sports writer by trade. Here he is reporting on another football team a month from now. Johnny Dog whiffs entirely. Carney still hasn't moved. He's clobbered right where he caught the ball. Edwards, who made the first block, is knocked out cold. Cumberland has lost its quarterback on the first play of the game. Cumberland gains 3 yards on its first play from scrimmage. It's one of only 4 times they get past the line of scrimmage all day. They choose to punt on 3rd down, and Tech scores 2 plays later. Cumberland fumbles on 1st and 10, Tech scores. Cumberland fumbles on 1st and 10 again, Tech scores again. By the 18th play of the game, Tech is already up 28-0.
Well,
everything is as it should.
So much for that.
Georgia Tech is a powerhouse.
I had historical
they were in the middle
AI
of a
set up.
33-game undefeated streak that lasted more than 4 years. Up 28-0, Georgia Tech is stopped at the 1, but it's not because Cumberland stopped them. The opposite, actually. Tech's running back, Strupper, takes it to the 1 untouched. The Cumberland players actually get out of his way, but then he downs it. What happens next comes from a book about this game called You Dropped It, You Pick It Up by Jim Paul. It is the most complete source on this game I was able to find. Sadly, it's out of print. It explains that another of Tech's running backs, Canty Alexander, had yet to ever score a touchdown, and his teammates liked to give him grief about it. A week prior, Tech got to the 1 and handed Alexander the ball, and then his linemen just moved out of the way and let him get clobbered for 3 straight downs, and then they gave somebody else the ball to score on 4th down. They were gonna do the same thing here. The Tech players just hit the dirt and gave up, but then for some reason, the Cumberland players did too. Maybe they were scared, maybe it was some weird animalistic instinct, or maybe they just didn't know what to do. That left Alexander as the only man standing on the field, 1 yard from the goal. This should be the easiest touchdown of all time, but he bobbles the snap and he inadvertently boots it a couple of times before he finally recovers it in the end zone. As a 2-team effort, it's probably one of the dumbest plays in the history of football. So after the touchdown, Georgia Tech receives the kickoff.
Would get back.
Yeah, Georgia Tech, who just scored, receives the kickoff. See, back in the day, if your opponent scored on you, you had the option of kicking or receiving on the ensuing play. I don't know why you would ever do this or why this was an option, but it was. And throughout the game, Cumberland chose to kick after being scored on 5 times. Early in the second
This
quarter,
actually looks
Tech
more
leads
interesting. I
7-0.
might play as Minshew
Against all
in a
odds,
future
Cumberland
game.
actually finds itself a 3rd and 1. Coach Allen wants to catch them off guard, and he wants to do this by punting. George E. Allen will later go on to have an eventful life. He'll serve as a political operative and become close with FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower. They were presidents who had known him. He even wrote a book. It was called Presidents Who Have Known Me. But for now, he is a nervous 20-year-old nobody coaching against John Heisman. He orders his team to punt, but in the huddle, they decide, no, we are absolutely not punting on 3rd and 1. They line up, Leon McDonald gets the pitch right, and then rather than go the 1 yard for the 1st down, he panics and punts anyway. It bounces out of bounds 11 yards downfield. Play 45. Morris Gouger fields the kick, and Georgia Tech's special team unit somehow overruns him. There's nothing but open field in front of him. He has daylight. Cumberland hasn't even made it to the 50-yard line yet. A touchdown would be unthinkable. Morris trips and falls over a teammate at his own 20. His teammate was looking for his glasses. Play 48. Edwards, the quarterback who was knocked out cold on the first play of the game, is sent back in. He can't really walk straight. He can't even talk. He is showing obvious concussion-like symptoms. He can't call for the snap. His impatient center snaps it anyway and pops him right in the head. Edwards has now appeared in 2 plays and has been carried off the field unconscious 2 times. Later, this will also happen a 3rd time. Today, we
Once I get interwar artillery done, I'll go for better playing
frames.
frames.
Was treated about as seriously as a Charlie horse. This game has entered an unbelievably lengthy sequence. Between plays 44 and 82, the line of scrimmage never leaves Cumberland's red zone. For 39 straight plays, about 1/3 of the game, the line of scrimmage for both teams is always inside the Cumberland 20. This is absolutely ludicrous, and it's also what makes Georgia Tech's total offense all the more impressive. See, Tech only managed 471 offensive yards, which is not a ton. That's because they dominated Cumberland's offense so completely that their own offense just didn't have enough room to gain a lot of yards. Look at where their offense got the ball. Only a few of these could be considered real drives in the traditional sense. Most of them started inside the 20. They couldn't gain yards because they kept running out of them. Contrast this with a game Tech played against Vanderbilt in 2016, just a few weeks ago. Tech won 38-7. It was a great game for them. Taking into account turnovers, returns, and every other time they touched the ball on a play-by-play basis, they picked up 17% of the yards they could possibly get. And remember, that's a one-sided route. The 1916 team picked up 72% of all possible yards. No matter where you dropped Georgia Tech on the field, they were highly likely to score immediately on that play. It's staggering. Jim Priest is Georgia Tech's kicker, and he's bored. By the time this game is all over, he will have kicked 18 extra points. He bets his teammate a steak dinner that he can kick a ball through the uprights on a kickoff. But then he one-ups himself and he turns on the Jets. Morris Gouger, while lining up for the catch, smacks into the goalpost. The ball bounces off his head and into Priest's arms. Jim Priest has just caught his own kickoff for a touchdown. It's halftime. Coach Allen's team is physically and emotionally destroyed. Cumberland is losing 126-0. If that were a final score today, it would be the worst final score since 1932. Allen has no choice. He has to go talk to the man himself. He figures maybe Heisman will agree to end the game at 1/2. After all, Cumberland held up their end of the bargain. They showed up. Georgia Tech has all its gate receipts. It's true that John Heisman is a disciplined man. In fact, he was famous for telling his teams, better to have died a small boy than to fumble this football. But he's also a noble sportsman. Maybe he'll show mercy. Heisman does agree to shorten the game. By 5 minutes. He is a creator of this game. He is a football god, and a god who takes instruction from the God of the Old Testament. He is here to reduce them all to pillars of salt. He is a creator of fear and of you. He will grind your bones to make his bread. Skimming 5 minutes off the end still guarantees Cumberland 25 minutes of horror. Sometimes a weak expression of pity is the deepest act of cruelty. Play 78. Johnny Dog fields the kick. He looks before him. All his teammates have fallen to the ground in resignation. He staggers to the 10.
This root beer I'm drinking is pretty good. This will basically it also affected.
Edwards is back in the game, despite being knocked unconscious twice. He takes the snap and pitches it to Johnny Dog, who pitches it back.
Economy loss,
Neither
that's the term I meant, not immobilization.
They keep tossing it back and forth, demanding that the other one take it. And the weight of a Georgia Tech tackler crashes down on them both. Edwards is carried off the field a third time. Alright, brief disclaimer. I'm about to tell you a part of the story that I don't think is true. It's in the book, so I'm going to tell you about it, but as the story goes, by now Cumberland is short on willing and able players. At least 2 players have run away and hid. 2 more players have leg injuries. So Coach Allen ties their injured legs together and has them hobble along on the field as one man. Play 84. Coach Allen sends in a law student known simply as Pee-wee, who is only here to impress his professors. Pee-wee does not know anything about the rules of football. He is ensured that he will not have to touch the ball or actually do anything. The center direct snaps him the ball. He stumbles around in a state of panic, then flings the ball away in fright. In the ensuing scramble, he runs away. He is now the 4th Cumberland player to try to run out of Grant Field. He hides behind a fence where 2 other players are hiding. They don't want him to give away their hiding spot, so they throw him back over the fence. There is no escape. Play 86. Johnny Dog is chased around the stadium by an actual dog who has wandered in from the stands. Sure, why not? If you're a regular viewer, you'll probably remember this little guy. All I can conclude is that in the early 20th century, wild dogs were everywhere. Play 94. Georgia Tech scores to make it 173-0. The point after attempt that follows is poetry. If Cumberland just lets this extra point sail through, the final score ends up being 223-0. But they block it, unwittingly ensuring the precision of Heisman's revenge. A 22-0 baseball loss is answered by a 222-0 unholy clobbering. I don't know how or why Cumberland finds resolve to fight at this moment, but they do. They execute what's known as the climb the ladder play, which has since been made illegal. One player gets on all fours and grabs the knees of a second player, who bends over at the waist and grabs the stomach of a third player. A fourth player, Vishy Woods, steps over their backs and shoulders and leaps as high as he can. This is Vishy Woods' face before the play. This is Vishy Woods' face after this play.
You know, I have to wonder if when exactly the climbing the ladder play was made illegal. Like, do you think that it ever got to the NFL or what? I always go for battlefield support. I don't think there's really like a correct option with in regards to doctrines, but I do not have any commanders, any field marshals. The Italians usually are pretty good for weapons, so let's butter them up. Six, 7 dockyards. That's a bit high. Either way, their industries will be a great addition to the banana empires. Feels odd that I have the option to sign that treaty while I'm at war, but... I will eventually switch out upgrade my banana salesman to like a 10 and with or something.
Hello friends, today I'm going to tell you about something very strange that happened to me the other day.
Yeah, this one was actually is the start of what was my theme for that Paranoia stream. Like, basically, if you don't know, you probably have seen those Shen Yun posters everywhere. For the longest time, I was wondering, what the hell are they for? Turns out they're propaganda for a cult. Which I learned thanks to JJ McCullough here.
But first, some background. Now, I live in a big city, which means that the Shen Yun performers recently came to town. If you live in a big city like me, you are probably vaguely familiar with them. They are like a traditional Chinese dance troupe thing. They were here in Vancouver during March, and during that time, they were really advertising all over the place. You'd go to the mall and they would have like a little table set up in the middle of the place with, you know, the brochures and like a little TV playing highlights from the show. Now, I don't know about you, but traditional Chinese dancing has never really been my thing, so I did not give the Shen Yun people that much attention when they first appeared. But at the same time, they were pretty hard to ignore. They had ads all over the train and in the newspaper and in billboards all over town. You know, it was a little bit much. And after a while, something started to feel a little bit off about them. Like that maybe they were trying a little bit too hard. I was at Best Buy one day, and right at the entrance, they had a little Shen Yun display with the TV. And so I stood there and I watched a bit of the trailer, and it was pretty odd. They showed some testimony of people who were supposedly just leaving the performance, and they all seemed just a little bit too giddy.
I'm incredibly inspired after coming tonight.
I feel 30 years younger.
Normally I'm bored when she takes me to these things, but I loved it. I could go another couple hours.
It was just amazing.
Yeah. See it 100 more times.
It's actually even worse if you visit the website. I've reviewed over 3,000 shows. None can compare to what I saw tonight. Go back and see it about 6 times, says Richard Conema, renowned Broadway critic. Go see it to believe it, because otherwise you are going to miss the most important thing in your life, says Joe Hurd, former White House photographer who watched Shen Yun 3 times. This is what he is credited as. I noticed a lot of the testimonials also made a big deal about how supposedly spiritually uplifting the show is in particular. A lot of the rhetoric is like,
I see God. I see the spirit of love and peace and the way that you would want the universe to be.
Now, as you have probably concluded by now, Shen Yun is actually just a front for a cult. Here is an excerpt from a review in the New Yorker. The dances continued, sleeves swirling, skirts rippling. A man came on stage to sing a song in Chinese, which was translated on the screen behind him. We followed Dafa, the Great Way, he began, singing about a creator who saved mankind and made the world anew. Atheism and evolution are deadly ideas. Modern trends destroy what make us human, he sang. That same New Yorker piece also noted that there isn't really even such a thing as traditional Chinese dance. The Shen Yun people just exploit the cultural ignorance of white folk to reel them in. But here is where the story gets even more interesting. You see, Shen Yun is run by the Shen Yun Performing Arts Organization, which is run by the Falun Gong. The Falun Gong is a Chinese cult started in 1992 by Li Hongzhi, who claims to be a supernatural being from another dimension sent to Earth to save humanity through a combination of breathing exercises and books on tape. The pitch...
If you... whenever I first found out about Falun... You probably heard about all the stories about prosecution of the Falun Gong, and, like... I found that odd because, like... while it's true that the PRC it does not have a favorite religion in per se, they're also not a state that's, like, particularly infamous for, like persecuting people just because of their religion. Like, okay, there is the Uyghur genocide, and with that comment I can kiss any chance of joining Niji Sanji goodbye, but I valued a case on collab too much to do that, so... Ooh, hey, I can build submarines now.
is that if you follow Master Li's teachings, you can eventually cleanse your body of all weakness and illness, and eventually transcend the fleshy prison of the cursed human world and ascend to a higher plane of existence where you can become a perfect godlike being, much like Master Li himself. It's a lot like Scientology, basically.
Yay.
And much like Scientology, as long as you profess undying loyalty to the Master, you will eventually be saved when the era of great cleansing comes and the enlightened are separated from the impure. Incidentally, in Master Li's world, impure behavior includes things such as using medicine, homosexuality, and race mixing. So yes, the whole thing seems a bit nuts. But hold on to your hats, because it gets even weirder from here. You see, we are not supposed to say too many mean things about the Falun Gong people, because they are so heavily persecuted by the Chinese government. Much like the Romans in Jesus' time, the Chinese Communist Party considers Master Li to be a troublemaker whose wacky beliefs could undermine their tyrannical hold on the public. So Falun Gongism is banned in China, forcing Mr. Li to preach his nonsense from New York, where he has lived in exile since 1998. According to Amnesty International, over the last 20 years, tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been arbitrarily detained as part of a campaign of intimidation and persecution targeting the group. Practitioners have been held in psychiatric hospitals, re-education through labor facilities, a form of administrative detention imposed without charge, trial, or judicial review, or sentenced to long prison terms. This is obviously very sinister, but the Falun Gong people think it doesn't sound bad enough. Master Li obviously has vested interest in making himself sound very big and powerful and threatening, with, millions of followers. And as a result, official Falun Gong propaganda, including the Shen Yun show, often play up their persecution to, cartoonish extremes. I remember a while ago, the Falun Gong people commissioned this flaky Canadian politician named David Kilgore to write a big report proving that the Chinese government had in fact detained hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and was harvesting their organs while they were still alive. This is a very common Falun Gong allegation, but it is also one that human rights experts are pretty skeptical of, just because there's not really a lot of hard evidence. The Chinese government does have a gruesome history of harvesting and selling the organs of executed prisoners, but there is no real proof that the Falun Gong people specifically have been on the receiving end of this, let alone...
Funny story, when I first watched this video, I actually got curious if there was, any merit. So I did some research, and it turns out that Falun Gong doesn't have anything forbidding their followers from drinking or smoking. So, in other words, there's literally no reason why a Falun Gong practitioner would be seen as more desirable in terms of who to harvest their organs from than, say, I don't know, like an immigrant worker or something.
That they comprise the majority of its victims. It seems like a bit of a PR tactic of just taking one of the most sensationalistically evil things that the Chinese government has ever done and trying to conflate it in the mind of the international community with the more generalized persecution of the Falun Gong. But anyway, the point is, because we in the West do not really like the Chinese communists, particularly how little respect their government seems to have for the right of freedom of religion in that country, there has been a lot of pressure over the years to not be too critical of the Falun Gong. The thinking is that if we concede that the Falun Gong is a cult, which it very obviously is, we will be legitimizing the pretext that the Chinese use to suppress freedom of religion in general, particularly to Christians and Muslims. The Chinese state argues that religion is something inherently dangerous and subversive, and thus needs to be controlled by the government. And we in the West say, no, religion is good and harmless, even though we all know on some level that that's not always true. Religious groups can, in fact, be bad things, but the Chinese have gone way too far with this conclusion, and we don't want to give them any moral cover for doing that. As a result, when the Falun Gong is talked about in America or Canada or Europe or wherever, you are very likely to hear a lot of euphemistic language about how it is just a spiritual movement and this sort of thing. Governments in the West also tend to talk about the persecution of the Falun Gong as being one of China's most visible human rights abuses. The Chinese government, in turn, really hates it when the West does this. They think that we are really enabling this group that they see as a serious threat. Ever since Master Li's exile to America, Falun Gong has spent a lot of time propagandizing to Chinese immigrants in the West, and he seems to have been relatively successful. Here in Vancouver, for instance, which has quite a large Chinese population, you do often see Falun Gong demonstrations against the Chinese government in public protests and stuff. Sometimes they're camped outside government offices and things. The Falun Gong also owns a newspaper called the Epoch Times, which you may have seen. It's very anti-communist as well. But of course, nothing compares to the Shen Yun extravaganza. All right, now let us bring the story back to me. The other day I get an email from some guy named Franco, and he is like, I have a video I want you to put on your YouTube channel. I will give you $500 if you do. And this is very hilarious to me because Franco is very obviously just some sort of Chinese agent who is trying to rope me into some sort of anti-Falun Gong propaganda campaign. The video is terrible. It features a white guy sitting in what I can only describe as a North Korean news studio, blandly reading some script about how evil the
You know, if I was to do something like that, I would say I would at least give them like freedom to say what they want as long as they followed certain talking points. Like, why on earth you would want like doing that sort of thing is like just posting the video when it's clearly not even you who is really gonna tell your fans is really gonna tell the fans of a page, hey, this guy I was bought at. Oh, like unless like it's some like clip page like archiving lost media, which hypothetically speaking that could work, but I would find it real funny if the PRC he wound up doing that to me.
Shen Yun show is.
I hope everyone can truly see the real purpose of this forum and the hopes in this video to avoid feeling cheated in the future.
It is so obviously communist propaganda, it really boggles my mind that they thought this would be persuasive to anyone, or that you guys would just accept this if I put this on my channel. It is also a little bit insulting to me that Franco has done absolutely no research into my own background, given that a quick Google search would find that I have written some very critical articles about the Chinese government for the Washington Post. Now obviously I had no intention of taking Franco's money or playing along with his little stunt, but I did try to string him along for a little bit, just so I could learn more about this crazy scheme. I asked him if the money was coming from the Chinese government, and he denied this, but then I said, okay, so how about if I insert a little bit at the beginning where I talk about how evil the Chinese Communist Party is? And he was like, no, you can't do that. I also asked him about the guy in the video, if he maybe had his own YouTube channel or something, And Franco was like, no, he is just a small reporter. I think it would be cool to track him down though. I suspect they paid him a lot, but I wonder if he regrets it. He's probably just some white guy living in China, and I know that they can be easy marks sometimes. If you guys know any good sleuthing techniques, let me know. Anyway, the point I am trying to get across in this video is that propaganda is a complicated thing. To live in the modern world is to be targeted by elaborate, expensive campaigns designed to change your thinking, while also concealing the hand of the person who wants to do that changing. It is also important to understand that propaganda lives in a complex ecosystem in which it responds to and interacts with other forms of propaganda. It is clear, for instance, that both Master Li and the Chinese government feed off the propaganda of each other, and this results in an endless cycle of disinformation in which it is very difficult to tell truth from fiction. The organ harvesting thing is a good example. Both sides have such little credibility, it is really difficult to know what to think. Now, personally, I think that a tyrannical communist government is evil, but I also think that a messianic apocalyptic cult is evil in its own way as well. And yet, a PR battle is being waged across the world right now, trying to convince us that we have to pick a side. The last thing either side wants is for people to think for themselves. That is the biggest threat of all. So a while ago, I made a video entitled, "They Tried to Get Me to Post Chinese Propaganda." It is one of my most favorite videos I have ever made. It is about the conflict between the government of China and a bizarre cult known as the Falun Gong. They are engaged in a very vicious propaganda war against one another, and their target is you, even if you don't realize it. And in my opinion, this conflict is very morally ambiguous, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
Just realized that it would probably be better if I ended up purchasing Belize, since hey, I would gain a core on that through unifying these, and I will. Well, once I've. But yeah, we're gaining manpower. I almost forgot that I already had them. I should research trains. I was mainly doing that so I could get a different flag, but also the color is nice.
most sensible people, I have an enormous amount of contempt for the Chinese government. It is clearly a cruel dictatorship that I believe to be a force for bad in the world. China's leaders have a ton to answer for in terms of their handling of the coronavirus pandemic, their oppression of Hong Kong, their support of rogue regimes around the world, and the systemic suppression of the rights of their own people. I think that probably the best thing that Donald Trump has done as president, and the thing that America's allies should be the most supportive of, are his efforts, however imperfect and bumbling, to contest the growth of China's economic and political power around the world. Now, all of that said, Falun Gong is quite obviously not a good guy either. Falun Gong is a cult, straight up. It is led by a megalomaniac fraud known as Master Li Hongzhi, who claims to be an interdimensional being with supernatural powers. We will get into the specifics of Master Li's lunatic worldview in a bit, but for the time being, suffice it to say that Falun Gong unambiguously has all of your major culty characteristics. Master Li pushes an elaborate system of behavior and thought controls on his followers, which are known as Falun Dafa.
Falun Dafa is an advanced cultivation system that was created by Mr. Li Hongzhi. It originates from the Falun Dafa cultivation practice in the Buddha school and cultivates Jun Shan Ren, or truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, the supreme characteristics of the universe.
The basic gist is that Master Li puts some magical force inside of your tummy, which is known as the Fallen, and the Fallen lets you harness all of the world's positive energy, which is known as Gong.
The Fallen that Master has planted at the lower abdominal area automatically absorbs energy from the universe, transforms the energy, and helps a practitioner to practice. When rotating counterclockwise, the Falun emits energy. It can correct all abnormal states and bring salvation to sentient beings.
Properly harnessing this energy, in turn, requires doing a lot of repetitive, mind-numbing meditation exercises, as spelled out in the Master's various books and videos and multi-day seminars. But it's all worth it, because Master Li says that those who prove their allegiance to Falun Dafa will eventually achieve superhuman levels of happiness, success, and health, just like him, the greatest man who has ever lived. Though it started in China, Master Li's outfit is currently based in this gigantic 400-acre compound in the scenic Catskills of New York. Here the Master lives with his most devoted followers, who tend to his every whim and venerate him as a divine being.
When Li Hongzhi would speak, the way she looked at him was just like he was God. Because that's what these people believe, that Li Hongzhi is effectively God.
They venerate him so much, in fact, that according to a recent groundbreaking investigation by NBC, they even allow him to pick out their romantic partners. No gay stuff, though. The Master is very against homosexuality. Falun Gong has only been around for less than 30 years, but it has been very successful and now has followers all over the world. Its greatest success has always been among Chinese immigrants, but it has started to make considerable inroads with people from other backgrounds as well. There are now even multi-generational Falun Gong families with children who have been born into the cult. Now, you may be wondering why we don't hear more about this. Why doesn't Falun Gong get the same sort of negative press that other cults do, like the Scientologists or NXIVM, or even comparatively milder things like CrossFit? Well, this is because Master Li has put together an incredibly sophisticated propaganda infrastructure, which is designed to obscure the reality of what he's up to. Like most cults, Falun Gong requires unpaid labor from its followers in order to test their faith, and Master Li uses this labor to staff his various propaganda outlets. Such outlets include the Shenyun Ballet Show, which targets middle-class women, several right-wing news outlets, most notably the Epoch Times, which targets older men, and multiple YouTube and social media channels, which target millennials, like you. I will also note that they are not above just pitching themselves directly either. For example, they sometimes just run straight up ads for themselves on YouTube with no pretense whatsoever. Alright, now let us talk about how Falun Gong propaganda works. This requires a bit of understanding of Master Li's general view of the world, which goes something like this. The Chinese government is the single most evil thing in the entire world because it oppresses Master Li's religion and forced him into exile in America. But the Chinese government is also evil because it is communist. And the very idea of a Chinese communist is deeply offensive to Master Li's ultra-xenophobic sensibilities. You see, Master Li believes that every race was created by a different god, and therefore all of the different races of the world should stay separate and never mingle or cross-contaminate with each other. He is quite infamously opposed to mixed race people, who
You know, I've never really understood why it is that people believe will oppose this sort of thing. Like, you do know, that we've fought wars over racism, and I'm right.
he considers to be spiritually defective. And in the next life, all of the different races will each live on their own planet, and we'll all be a lot happier. I believe this was an idea that Barney on The Simpsons once promoted as well.
I'm just saying that when we die, there's going to be a planet for the French, a planet for the Chinese, and we'll all be a lot happier.
Mr. Gumbel, you're upsetting me.
No, I'm not.
Anyway, the fact that the current government of China is communist is deeply repulsive to Master Li, not because of anything about communism in particular, but rather because it is a European ideology created by Europeans. The current rulers of China are thus literal demons from hell, dedicated to upsetting the correct order of the universe. China's true destiny is to purify itself of all foreign ideas, and indeed even most modern ones. This is a man who is fierce.
You know, the funny thing that a lot of people who seem to ally with this guy seem to forget is that democracy is a European invention. It was invented by the Greeks. So siding with him means you're essentially just siding with authoritarianism. Something to keep in mind.
Anti-medicine and anti-science. His website even brags that at his compound in New York, There's barely a screw, nail, or metal joint to be found. Now, given the generally backwards-looking nature of his worldview, it may be unsurprising to learn that Master Li cribs a lot of his spirituality from ancient Chinese superstitions and folklore. And one traditional Chinese belief that he seems to be super into is this idea that our emotional and mental health is ultimately connected to the 5 essential organs of the human torso: the liver, the lungs, the heart, the kidneys, and the spleen. Meaning, as you become more emotionally and mentally strong, your torso organs get healthier too. And now, here comes the wild part. Since following Master Li's teachings brings Falun Gong practitioners to a state of near-divine emotional tranquility and spiritual well-being, it logically follows that they would have some of the best, most beautiful, most succulent torso organs in the world, and the demonic Chinese communists know this. So Falun Gong teaches that the communist devils have implemented a broad-scale program of murdering Falun Gong practitioners in order to harvest their world-class organs. The big muckety-mucks in the Chinese regime can then sell these organs at a premium on the black market, knowing how desirable they are. According to this one Falun Gong website, doctors in China will brag about having Falun Gong in stock, like they were Gucci handbags or something. What an outrage. Once you know these basic facts about how Master Li sees the world, it is very easy to tell if the criticism of the Chinese government that you're hearing is actually just Falun Gong propaganda. One very visible tick is making an obsessively big deal about the fact that China is run by a communist party. And by obsessive, I mean like mentioning it in every single reference to the government. Another tell is just portraying the oppression of the Falun Gong, which will always be described as a perfectly innocuous spiritual movement, as the single worst, most important human rights abuse that the Chinese government is committing. Now, Master Li's small community of followers in China have undeniably faced well-documented abuse at the hands of the Chinese regime. But when viewed in the context of, say, the oppression of the Chinese Muslims, it is very difficult to argue that this is even the most pressing religious liberty issue.
Yeah, I forget what I said earlier, but the thing is the Falun Gong are nowhere near as prosecuted as they make themselves out to be.
Facing the country. But the biggest giveaway of all is just any mention of the organ
Give me a sec.
harvesting conspiracy theory. Though the Chinese government has harvested the organs of executed prisoners in the past, this idea that they have some elaborate program of specifically harvesting the organs of Falun Gong practitioners is not a charge that has ever been credibly raised by anybody except for activists associated with Falun Gong in some way, which is because it is a charge that is ultimately grounded in what Falun Gong believes should be happening, rather than what actually is. Okay, so where Falun Gong propaganda seems to be enjoying a great deal of success these days is in right-wing America. This is because their anti-communist, anti-China messaging syncs up quite well with what a lot of conservatives already believe, which is that communism is wicked and that the Chinese government is a force for bad in the world, which are both perfectly fine things to believe. I believe those things. The problem is that the Falun Gong does not believe that China's communist government is bad because of an objective analysis of their policies. No, they believe it is bad because they think it is literally run by demonic spirits who are the primary embodiment of evil in this world. And since they believe this as a matter of religious principle, this means that their standards of evidence are not particularly high. This is very much the problem that has started to draw increasing negative attention to the leading news outlet of the Falun Gong movement, the Epoch Times. You've probably been seeing a lot of their ads lately because they have been spending an ungodly amount of money on YouTube advertising these days. Now, the Epoch Times has a sort of veneer of seriousness to it. You can browse through it and it won't seem all that weird at first glance. Relatively normal stories about politics and whatnot. But the extreme anti-China editorial position it takes by virtue of the fact of who runs it, means that it is also very open-minded about all sorts of wild conspiracy theories. Most recently, this has taken the form of them speculating, without any evidence, this idea that COVID-19 was something that the Chinese communists cooked up in a lab in order to wreak havoc on the world.
The paper recently produced this documentary about the origin of the virus. It pushed so many debunked theories, Facebook flagged it as false information.
Here in Canada, there have also been reports of unsolicited deliveries of a particularly provocative issue of the newspaper to people who don't want it. But the problems with Falun Gong media go deeper than that. You see, some time ago, Master Lee apparently concluded that Donald Trump is a divine agent of heaven sent to us to destroy the Chinese communists.
So part of their spiritual belief,
yes,
and it is a sort of spiritual practice, right? Spiritual group, is that Donald Trump is like a key figure in delivering the final judgment and victory over Chinese communism that they so anxiously wait for.
That is 100% correct.
And what this particular prophecy means is that anyone who opposes President...
Oh, this is going to be very interesting. France could wind up flipping into communism, which... Oh, Albania refused. What? How did that was unusual. Ooh, I can do this one.
Señor.
This is true. This whole path is ridiculous, and I love it. Pity that. I should be researching paratroopers, not tanks.
Sí, señor.
I won't be going to war with Cuba anytime soon, so let's buy steel from them. What strategic reasons do you not have? I mean...
Trump and his divine mandate must surely be an agent of evil in some way. And this opens the door to basically any lunatic pro-Trump conspiracy theory you can imagine. Falun Gong's leading conspiracy theory arm is the YouTube channel Edge of Wonder, which I've actually talked about before. They're really big into the whole QAnon, Pizzagate, deep state stuff, as well as basically all the other greatest hits of the right-wing crackpot set.
According to Q, the source of the financial control of the world are three groups: the Rothschilds, George Soros, and Saudi Arabia.
And when
You know, funny story about the Rothschilds. They actually aren't nearly as rich as people might make them out to be. Like, sure, they could probably stop, all members could probably stop working, but the thing is, you know who has a greater personal value than the Rothschilds? George Lucas. Yet I've never heard anyone unclaim that George Lucas started in the U.S.'s wars in the Middle East in the first decade of the 21st century just for the sake of having something to comment on with Revenge of the Sith, even though that would be more plausible than the Rothschilds.
Whenever China comes up, they hew tightly to the official Falun Gong party line.
Falun Gong is a meditation practice based on the universal principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and it believes in God or the divine creator. We have videos about this on YouTube.
So why are they being persecuted? Well, we believe this is...
Yeah, these guys are just a bunch of goobers. I wonder will Falun Gong attempt to create their own like VTuber agency? Communist street for Norway is pretty lackluster.
because now there is a high demand of new lungs from victims who have the virus in China.
There are some other Falun Gong front channels on YouTube as well, which are managed by a larger media network known as NTD, or New Tang Dynasty. The most
You know, you may have seen in this channel called Facts Matter with Roman Balmaikov. That's one of theirs. Like, Roman Balmaikov put out a really blatantly false claim that stated the PRC was equipping soldiers with helmets that could self-destruct, and you only have to take a few seconds to realize, wait, this makes no goddamn sense. And sure enough, it turns out that that what's actually happening is they're just equipped with the same thing that US helmets have, namely the ability to wipe frequencies. Even if they were going to do self-destruct helmets to have like a suicide method you can control. Helmets take a lot of damage. Cyanide pills would make much more sense. They're relying on ignorance.
well known of these is China Uncensored, which pushes a pretty steady stream of anti-China commentary in sync with general Falun Gong rhetoric.
The Chinese Communist Party is lying about the data. They're killing people for their organs, and they're making lots of money.
But some of the other affiliated channels are pretty weird. Like, they have a women-centric beauty channel called Beauty Within, hosted by these two pretty ladies. And while a lot of the content they make is just sort of general woman stuff, you can see in this video they made about meditation. They are quietly pushing links to Falun Dafa, which is described as Fell and Rose meditation practice. And do you want to see some cool detective work I did? At one point, one of the ladies is reminiscing about her personal history with meditation.
You have a baby picture of you meditating. It's the cutest thing.
With my dad. So it was something that...
Freeze frame. This poster behind the dad here is an official Falun Gong poster, which illustrates all the 5 Falun Dafa exercises demonstrated by Mr. Lee.
You know, I've seen a lot of like Asian-owned businesses own Falun Gong. This is advertised Shenyun, but I've never really talked about anything. I've never really asked them. And if they're like associated. Aletta Sky would be proud of what I'm about to do. Speaking of which, war economy. That's unusual. This is the generic focus tree for Road to 56, if you don't know.
Hongzhi, the founder of Fallen Dafa. Now, here is the big problem that I have with all of this. As I said in the beginning of the video, it is perfectly valid to be concerned about the growing geopolitical power of China. Personally, I think that this issue has the potential to define global politics for a generation or more in the same way that the power of the Soviet Union did during the Cold War. But if those of us concerned with the rise of China allow a leadership role to be played in this conflict by a loopy cult with little respect for the truth, then we are ultimately just shooting ourselves in the foot. We cannot allow the anti-China position to be defined by liars and crackpots and religious fanatics, which is of course exactly what the Chinese government often dismisses its critics as being. In particular, I am quite worried that the Falun Gong cult is getting in way too deep with the conservative movement of this continent. These days, I have noticed that whenever criticism is made of any Falun Gong aligned media outlet, particularly the Epoch Times, conservatives will rush to defend it. We saw this when Facebook banned the Epoch Times for deceptive advertising practices in 2019, or when mainstream media outlets like NBC or the CBC in this country publish critical reporting on them. There is a tendency to assume that because Falun Gong aligned media is pro-Trump and anti-China, well, they must be the good guys here and their critics just jealous progressives. Just anecdotally, I've also heard stories here in Canada of conservative politicians starting to get into Falun Gong spiritual practice, or otherwise falling under the direct influence of the cult in some way, which is pretty disturbing. Now, the idea of American conservatives coming under the sway of a weird Asian cult might strike you as extremely bizarre, but there's actually a pretty strong precedent for this. Have you ever heard of the Moonies, the mass marriage people? They were started by a guy from North Korea known as the Reverend Moon. Like Master Lee, he also faced persecution in his native land and immigrated to America. And like Falun Gong, his wacky religion was also taken seriously by a lot of conservative Americans because of how stridently anti-communist it was. The Reverend Moon did a very good job marketing himself as a vital ally in the fight against North Korean communism. And as the years went on, he embraced more generally right-wing causes as well. He was a huge supporter of Presidents Nixon and Reagan, and was a particularly outspoken proponent of gun rights. Conservative leaders in other countries loved him too, including Margaret Thatcher and Brian Mulroney. He even founded his own conservative newspaper, known as the Washington Times. Not the Washington Post, where I work, the Washington Times. But in retrospect, backing the Reverend Moon was one of many disastrous alliances the West made in the name of fighting communism. Today we know that the Moonies were a terribly oppressive and traumatizing cult that engaged in brainwashing, forced labor, and the physical and sexual abuse of its members. The Reverend Moon was also eventually outed as a crook who had enriched himself through all sorts of shady financial doings. And as he got older, his views eventually grew so extreme and insane that no one wanted anything to do with him anymore. He died in 2012 as a thoroughly disgraced embarrassment. There is a lot we do not currently know about the inner workings of Falun Gong and Master Lee's empire, but knowing what we know about cults, it is very hard to believe that this story will not ultimately end the same way as the Moonies. One of the most important lessons of the Cold War is that the enemy of my enemy cannot always be my friend. If we want to triumph in a battle of ideas, it is vitally important that those who profess to be on the side of what is morally right and just are able to maintain that integrity. And as long as Falun Gong remains an ally of the West, that task becomes a lot harder than it should be.
You may be wondering what the point of that is, but well, this next video is related. You may recall how like a year or two ago, the Shinzo Abe, who in addition the ancestor of a war criminal, no really, Nobusuke Kishi, I forget which is the surname and the first name when it comes to Japanese naming. But anyway, one of Japan. He was a war criminal who tried but ultimately failed to get the failed to like overthrow democracy, but because as the U.S. was there, he failed in his efforts. He was only really put in charge, I think, because as there was no one better qualified, which I find hard to believe. Like, was there really like no like civilian politician they could have gone with or something? Why is Germany calling me to arms against Ethiopia, of all countries?
Show today with breaking news out of Japan. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died in the hospital.
Investigation into the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Prime Minister's association with a religious group he blamed for his mother's financial ruin.
A nation in shock. The longest-serving Prime Minister in Japanese history assassinated while giving a public speech. Nothing like this has happened in the country since 1936. An event no one expected would ever happen again. What was first assumed to be a politically motivated attack was later clarified to be something else entirely. The man who pulled the trigger calmly shared his story. This was not about politics. Instead, it was about religion, or what some would instead call a cult. The Unification Church. A young man blamed the organization for a ruined life. This young man grew, and so too did his hatred for those who he deemed responsible, until one day he enacted his revenge. Shinzo Abe, born 21st of September 1954, was a polarising figure throughout his long political career, a staunch conservative whom was often described by detractors or opponents as a right-wing Japanese nationalist. Despite this, he managed to do what no other Japanese politician had done before him: Taking office first in 2006, Shinzo Abe resigned just a year later, citing health concerns. In September of 2012, he made a return to the spotlight as the re-elected leader of the LDP party and defeated their opponent in a 108-89 vote to yet again become Prime Minister. He made many controversial statements throughout his time in office, including that of a revisionist history regarding Japanese war crimes in World War II, which caused tensions throughout the region with China and South Korea. Despite these and many other controversies surrounding his position and policy, Shinzo Abe as Prime Minister managed to beat out oppositions in 2 more elections, 2014 and 2017, before he elected to resign yet again in 2020 due to the relapse of those prior health concerns. Despite all the controversy, Shinzo Abe was loved by many within Japan. His legacy is that of complexity and division among all who followed his career. Somewhere along the way, however, Shinzo Abe is accused to have been involved in an organisation that is perhaps more controversial than the peaks and valleys of his political career. In the modern world, a charismatic leader can spread their word and gain followers. This can be described in 2 different ways, depending on a few factors and your perspective on how that group operates. The first is a pejorative term, cult. The second is NRM, or New Religious Movement. The major difference between the two is how a member's recruited and treated, as well as with a cult often being more of a social movement versus a purely religious one. Which brings us to the Unification Church and where that is classified between these 2 terms. Originally founded in 1954, South Korea by Sun Myung Moon, the Unification Church is a massive, multifaceted organisation that has spread across the globe. Some of the cliff notes as to why some call this organisation a cult stems from the original leader Moon and his claim to be the Messiah. He fervently believed that he was the second coming of Christ, and his followers were to not only believe this, but spread the word in hopes of recruiting more people to the church and his cause. Members of the Unification Church are often referred to as Moonies, named of course after their great leader, who is described within the divine principle texts as the one man sent by God to resolve the fundamental problems of human life and the universe. Now, as to how this South Korean organisation has anything to do with Shinzo Abe, Japan, and an assassination, all comes down to how exactly the Unification Church is funded. Around 70% of the church's funding comes from the nation of Japan, and particularly what they refer to as spiritual sales. Moonies will research the deaths of Japanese citizens and then travel door to door claiming to be in contact with the recently deceased loved ones of families they are targeting. The claim is that if the family does not give money to the church, the deceased will not find their way into heaven. Due to this and many other factors, the Unification Church, despite the name, is said to cause conflict and erosion of families. Followers are sometimes instructed to marry the church's choice or to give over so much money that it would jeopardize the safety and the stability of any family involved. Due to the widespread operation of the Unification Church and the amount of funding they are able to procure, they have deep ties to many political organizations across the globe and have been involved in policy, either publicly or privately, in many, many countries. After World War II, the first elected Prime Minister of Japan was a man by the name of Nobusuke Kishi. As Prime Minister, he assisted in bringing the Unification Church to Japan. Nobusuke Kishi had a son by the name of Shintaro Abe, who became Japan's foreign minister. He, of course, was also heavily involved with the church, and as you would have guessed, Shinzo Abe is the son and grandson of these 2 men. All 3 of them are alleged to have been at many of the services for the church for multiple decades, and they are not alone, as many other high-ranking Japanese politicians have been linked with the Unification Church and subsequently with the Moonies. This information, while known publicly, did not take any form of media centre stage or seem to be deemed a problem until July 8th of 2022, the day that Shinzo Abe was carrying out his duties at a political event outside a train station in Nara City. During his speech, a man with a homemade firearm walked up behind him and opened fire. The first shot missed. Shinzo Abe turned around to see what the noise was, and the second shot landed. The suspect was arrested immediately and taken for questioning, which is where he calmly revealed the reason for the day's events. Tetsuya Yamagami was born September 10th, 1980 in a privileged household. His grandfather on the maternal side owned a local construction company, which his parents of course helped to run, and the family was generally quite affluent in the area. Tragedy struck early in Tetsuya's life. In 1984, his father took his own life. As he grew up, he grew close to his uncle as a result. Everything progressed relatively normal from there, that is, until the death of his grandfather. This was when things started to really go wrong for the family and get out of control. Tetsuya's mother took over the construction company, but clearly struggled with the death of her father and her husband. In the 90s, to deal with the loss she'd suffered, Tetsuya's mother joined the Unification Church. She regularly attended gatherings, taking her 3 children with her as much as possible. Tetsuya, now a teenager, watched his mother donate every penny that the family had remaining, starting with around $720,000, which were all of their savings, followed by a parcel of land her father had left her, and even the house the mother and 3 children were living in. This caused the family to declare bankruptcy in 2002. The bankruptcy, however, didn't stop the mother from donating to the church. Tetsuya and his siblings were neglected to the point they regularly needed to contact their uncle to deliver them food, as their mother was too busy at the church and prioritized giving the money to them instead of buying food for her children. Due to this financial situation, Tetsuya had little option but to leave home without the education he longed for, as the family just had no money for him to go to college. As a result, he joined the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, where he was posted to Kure Naval Base and the destroyer JS Matsuyuki. 3 years later, in 2005, he attempted to take his own life so that his siblings could collect his life insurance policy. Things were just that bad. A few years later, his older brother was diagnosed with lymphoma, a disease he struggled with for many years, and of course couldn't resolve due to financial restraints for medical bills. This brother took his own life to escape the disease and financial burden in 2015. Tetsuya by this point blamed the misfortune of his entire life on the Unification Church and the Moonies. He researched the group with an obsession and planned to assassinate the leader. However, he discovered the Shinzo Abe connection and decided that his grudge was with the man who helped spread the church's influence in Japan, which ultimately consumed his mother and ruined his family's life. On July 7th, just 1 day before the attack, Tetsuya sent a letter to a blog editor who reported on problems experienced by children of religious cult believers. The letter reads, "I once wrote to you that I want a gun so bad that a hand might as well come out of my throat to reach for one. Since then and now, I have devoted myself to procuring a gun. My devotion resembled that of the Unification Church followers, who discard all but their entire life in the name of a false god. My fateful encounter with the Unification Church goes back about 30 years. My mother, since having entered the religion, wasted over 100 million yen, our family's collapse, bankruptcy. As such things went by and my teenage years were over, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this experience continued to distort the rest of my entire life. While I did loathe Abe, he is not the primary enemy. He is no more than one sympathizer of the Unification Church, one who has great influence in the real world." This letter was discovered days after the assassination and later released to the Japanese media, along with the story of Tetsuya Yamagami. With nothing left to lose and having accomplished part of his mission, the now 41-year-old man described his previous attempts to remove high-ranking members of the church from this mortal realm. From the time of bankruptcy over 20 years ago, he would walk the church halls with a knife, searching for the opportunity to find the South Korean leaders of the church. He made plans to burn another member with a Molotov cocktail in 2019, but had to give up due to the inability to access the church on that given day. He considered making homemade explosives, but...
You know, the reason I chose to follow those previous 2 videos with this one is because, well, the Unification Church is the common name for the Moonies. I would not be surprised at all if we hear reports if something like this happens in the future. I hope to be proven wrong.
didn't want to harm innocent bystanders, instead electing to make homemade firearms. Tetsuya Yamagami spent the majority of his adult life searching for retribution. On July 8, 2022, he enacted that vengeance.
The government has begun an official investigation into the Unification Church. There have been months of revelations about links between the religious group and the governing Liberal Democratic Party.
In the immediate aftermath of the event, there was panic and uncertainty. Politicians cancelled plans and campaign appearances out of respect as well as safety concerns. No one knew what else could happen or even why this had happened. After Tetsuya Yamagami's questioning, the letters and his tweets were publicised, it raised more concerns and questions than if this was purely politically motivated. Questions were being asked by media both foreign and domestic. How much of this was true and how deep did it run? Did the Unification Church have these political affiliations, and if they did, to what end? In a surprise, the Unification Church did confirm the story, though they left out key details. A representative confirmed the Yamagami family were part of the church for that period of time, and that they donated money, but didn't confirm a dollar value. They also denied that Shinzo Abe was involved with them, just that he gave friendly speeches for their affiliated organisations. Then there was infighting among the Moonies from Korea, with a statement released expressing guilt over the death of Shinzo Abe. A prominent leader of the Moonies claimed he wanted to reform the actions of the church in Japan, striking the practice of spiritual sales completely from the organisation. Unfortunately, the other leaders were having none of it. They saw the massive financial benefit and they didn't want to let go. In fact, they went so far as to deny everything he said, instead claiming that the media discussing these topics were tantamount to hate speech and threats against their followers.
You know, I'm not an expert. I will admit that I'm not an expert in free speech, but if you really have to claim that sort of thing, I'm willing to bet that it's not.
Which is why they organised protests where they transported over 3,000 people from their Korean facility right to the streets of Seoul to rally against Japanese media. Most of the participants in this rally were Japanese women who were married to Korean men through their arranged marriage system. As if that wasn't enough, they also started to sue Japanese media outlets or even talk show guests for defamation whenever they talked about the assassination potentially being linked to the Unification Church. In Japan, on a political level, the leader of the LDP reshuffled his cabinet with the aim to closely examine each member for any affiliation to the Moonies, though only after massive percentage drop-offs in the party's approval ratings. On a civil level, reports and studies started to surface that showed close to $40 million reported as damages from over 400 victims of the church from the year 2017 until 2020. The reason the lawyers reported this money as damages is that the victims claimed to have been coerced into donating the money under false pretense. On October 16, 2022, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida announced a probe which would assess the allegations against the Unification Church operation within the nation. Should any of this prove true, the organisation would be officially dissolved within Japanese territory. Which brings us to the public's reaction. To some, Tetsuya Yamagami was deemed a hero, a fighter of freedom, and hailed as an icon. T-shirts were sold in his name, people were cosplaying as him on the day he actually performed the assassination, movies were released detailing his life on the day of Shinzo Abe's funeral, petitions were filed to drastically reduce his sentence, and there was widespread support for his actions. The issue here...
You know, I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, and the fact that he was able to expose, such a hardcore connection in between what is essentially a cult and the government. For all the black people give Scientology, I've never heard of them having this much influence. I'd be willing to bet money that if I started, randomly talking smack about Scientology in the middle of a stream, they probably would not do anything. Assuming they heard about it for obvious reasons, I'm not the type... I have a person who gets a lot of... attention on my streams, if you get what I'm saying. I'm missing many rifles.
Señor. Avancen. Avancen. Listo, señor.
Right,
is doing so could cause others to try to resolve their own problems in life with those same radical methods. And that is how the most polarizing figure in recent Japanese politics was assassinated due to his alleged involvement in an organization that has solicited billions of dollars from grieving Japanese families.
Well, that's all the reactions I had. Ecuador should be much easier.
¡Avanzando! ¡Atención! ¡Sí, señor! ¡Avancen! ¡Listo! ¡Avancen! ¡Listo! ¡Avancen! ¡Firme! ¡Listo! ¡Atención! ¡Listo! Sí, señor. ¡Avancen! ¡Sí, señor! ¡Están retrocediendo, señor! Sí, señor. ¡Avancen! ¡Atención! ¡Listo, señor! ¡Están retrocediendo, señor! ¡Avancen! ¡Listo!
I'm ending the stream after I get this here, mainly because I just wanted to see how much it would give me. And honestly, that is quite powerful. Yeah. I'm probably not going to continue this run. If I was to do this over again, I'd probably make a station units in the north. Maybe switch over or to like, or I'd also probably use infantry instead of cavalry, since they would make this faster. And I'd probably just go for Panama, Ecuador, and Colombia. And I'd probably go for Ecuador and Panama at the same time, and do a two-pronged attack on Colombia. But yeah, this was a fun path other than the one unscrew up near the end. So I'm going to call it a stream here. I will see you guys on Sunday, where I'll think of something and I'm gonna react to. Probably just stuff I like. Until then, I am Andreas Rebel, and I will see you next assignment.